Hello everyone. This video is going to be going over my settings for cutting various colored acrylics on my Atomstack A5 M50 Pro diode laser. That is a 5.5 watt output blue diode laser. One extra piece of information is the blue diode for the Atomstack runs at around 455 nanometers, plus or minus 5, on the color spectrum. That's very important when it comes to the acrylic. The color you choose for your acrylic, the closer it is on the color spectrum to the blue or whatever color your laser is, or the more white it has into it, the harder it is to cut, or to the point where you won't be able to cut it at all. You'll notice here, out of all of this, I don't have any blue. With the laser being blue, no matter what power, speed, or number of passes I did, I could never get a full clean cut on any shade of blue acrylic. Likewise, none of these settings are going to work on clear acrylic. The laser just goes straight through that. It's where I have that other video. You can kind of see how to do the etching on clear acrylic. But with a diode laser, you're never going to be actually cutting it. We'll start over here on the left side with the white. And as I said, the lighter it is, the more white it has into it, or the closer to blue, the harder it's going to be to cut. And after I go through these different outcomes here, I'll show you some of the settings in Lightburn so you can kind of see what the difference is. You notice here on the white, I've got a little ghosty and a llama. They both cut, okay. You notice here around the edge of the white, I don't know how well you can see that, there's a lot of striations or grooves in the edging. And that's because the laser has to go so slow and so many passes that it keeps melting and refusing that acrylic that causes it to get these really bad grooves in there. You can see that same effect really well if you look at the feet of this poor little llama. They melted and warped just horribly. And again, that's because in order to get any amount of cutting coming out of there, you've got to go really, really, really slow with a lot of passes. We'll compare the white ghost there to the same ghost cut out on black acrylic. I did end up painting it white afterwards, going to get a nice effect with it with some masking tape on there. But for these two comparing, if you can see the edging there, the white, you have those grooves and those striations. And the black, it's almost completely smooth. It's just a very, very clean cut on the black. And then also the difference between these two, cutting this one took me an hour and 5 minutes. Cutting this one took me 5 minutes. So about an hour difference between cutting these two just to get the exact same result. And again, that's because of going with the black versus the white acrylic. The next one I'll go to is I'll kind of show you a black and a gray comparison. So these are, again, it's the same design. You'll notice there, the gray, again, it has a lot of the striations around the edge there. And you'll also notice on the gray, it's turning white around that edging, where the black stayed solid black. That's, again, it's because the acrylic is melting rather than burning away. And so as it melts and dries with the multiple passes, it gets more and more opaque and becomes that white kind of burnt color on there. The main thing I want to call out to you here is if you look at the R in that first part in the try on there, on the gray, because that was such a fine line there, it melted out. It could not keep that in there, and that just kind of melted and dropped out of there. Where on the black, it was actually able to keep those details on there. Now, I will point out, though, that the gray, the etching, shows up a lot clearer than it does on the black. I don't know that that's really because of the black material or just because I still need to dial in those settings some. But that's just kind of to show you a compare and contrast of the differences, the quality you can get choosing the different color of acrylic. The next one I'll go into is dark green. I've got a little froggy here and a bee, which is a logo for one of the schools in this area. The bee is not anything really special. What I do want to point out here, though, is you'll notice this, and I'll show you this on the red as well. This little raised edge around there. That's because with it melting the acrylic, and these were all done without any air assist, that raised edge becomes more and more pronounced depending on the color of material you're using. The lighter colors or the more number of passes it needs, the more of that kind of raised edge you'll get. I did just mention all these were done without an air assist because I'm assuming that a lot of folks getting started won't have an air assist on the lower end lasers like I have. I did get an air assist added in after the fact. I'm not going to show you those examples here, but the big thing that changes is not really in the speed or the power, but this edging here, this raised part, is much less pronounced. You get a much clearer image of your design. The other thing to point out here is on this froggy, you notice he's got broken toes. The acrylic is already fairly fragile. I mean, it's easy to bend and snap. And when you melt it and it dries over and over again like that, it becomes even more fragile. So it's very easy to break off things. So as you're doing your designs, be very careful with those really fine details, because there's a good chance that if you try to do that and sell it or give it to someone, that those are going to very quickly snap off and kind of ruin your product. After green, we'll go to the lime green, which cuts a lot slower. And so again, it has that same issue with the striations and that white coloring around there. It did cut off. You'll notice there is some charring on here. Acrylic on some of these colors, because of the slow speed and the number of passes, does tend to flare up. I'll talk about that here in a minute when we get over into Lightburn. We'll go to orange next. Again, really bad with striations and then becoming that white coloring around the edge. And then you can also see several places there around the eye where it's got those charred from the flare-ups. The charring is really frustrating on acrylic because, unlike wood, you can't really sand it down, because if you sand it down, you lose all of that sheen and that glossiness of the acrylic. So the best you can really do is kind of paint it or work with some rubbing alcohol to kind of clean that off. But a lot of that gets in there so deep into the acrylic from the way it melts in that you're never getting that charring out there. So it's something to keep in mind. Next, we'll go to red. I really like red. Red's one of the most common ones I've been doing lately. It cuts really well, and I get it in the light there, you kind of see, again, it's got that bulging around the eyes. Now, in general practice, I mean, if you're not looking at it with real detail, like if you're doing this with an earring or anything like that, you're not going to notice that. It's going to look really nice, even so. But if you have an air assist, which is what I've started doing now, you can get a much cleaner look to it. This is a red kind of glitter translucent colored material. I was actually surprised this one cut at all. I was expecting the laser, kind of similar to clear acrylic that you can't cut. The light would just go straight through it and not cut. But it actually relatively cut quickly. But what you'll notice comparing these two is the loss of detail. Like if you look here in the ear especially, that very crisp line, you can see it's very circular and rounded out there in the glitter. And same thing around the eyes and the whiskers and everything like that. So the clear or translucent type acrylic and white are ones that you probably want to stay away from. One, it takes a really long time to cut through it. And two, you're not going to get that quality result you're probably looking for. The next one I'll go to is purple, which surprised me it worked as well as it did. Of course, purple being close to the spectrum of blue because it's a combination of blue and red. It cut fairly well. It didn't have a lot of the problems with the striations or the coloring, the edge whiting, but it didn't cut fully cleanly. You can see there in that spot right there. You just got to be really careful if you're doing purple to make sure you kind of work through it. And here's like some stacked text earrings that my wife asked me to make for her. She's a Kansas State Wildcat fan. So I was making these earrings and of course the Power Cat for her. The stacked text, I'll actually give you an example of that, of kind of the workflow to create that at the end of the video, just in case anyone's curious on how to go about doing that. Final piece here before I get to the business card is this is just kind of the etching on the red acrylic. It looks really nice. It's very crisp. It's very clean. It's a good quality. You can kind of see there's even that outline around the roads text there where it's got the two layers with a very fine gap between them. So that worked out rather well. I was very happy with how that turns out. And I'll go over the etching settings as well. The last thing I'm going to show you here before we kind of move on into Lightburn is, so I did a business card, starting kind of a online shop, kind of doing the J4 laser design, and that's from my wife and my initials. So here it is in the black acrylic and then just the standard 1/16 inch balsa wood or basswood. What you'll notice here between these two is on the black acrylic, you can notice even at that slower speeds that I used on it, it still has a lot of jumping. So you got a lot of banding there in it, and the smaller text isn't as clear. Whereas you have a lot, very crisp lines, of very consistent coloring in the wood. But one thing I thought I realized at the end after I was kind of go through it is once you go through and you cut those out, you can, of course, you can make a nice kind of combination. So here it is with the black acrylic with the wood inlay, and then sort of over here, let's see if I can get this going in, is the wood with the black acrylic inlay. It can kind of give a neat effect. It has a nice look to it. Because of the kerfing, you're going to have to use some form of adhesive to get it to stick in there, otherwise it's going to drop right out. But you can do some nice multicolored designs with your different layers of acrylic or different materials to get a really nice effect, I think, in the designs you may be working through. So yeah, so that's it. These are all kind of the finished products of some of the things I've been working on. So what we'll do now is we'll jump over into Lightburn, and I'll show you the actual settings I used for all of these, and then we'll go into a very simple workflow of creating kind of stacked text earrings. Here in Lightburn, before I get started going through my settings, I want to call off a couple caveats, warnings, and kind of safety concerns with this. So the first one is the standard. Your laser is going to be different from mine. Even if you have the exact same model, there are differences in the actual laser enclosure itself. So my settings may not be the exact same as yours. Make sure you run through and do a material test to determine exactly what settings you need, both for speed, power, number of passes, and all that good stuff with any material you're working on. Another safety item that is new and kind of unique with acrylic is that acrylic is melting rather than burning off, and it puts out some really rank fumes. You're going to want to make sure you're doing your acrylic work in a very well ventilated area, preferably with an enclosure that has a inline exhaust. So in our room, we have an inline exhaust that vents all the fumes from the laser outside the window. It does get really, really stinky, and I've read some things about the different health hazards of breathing that stuff in. So just please be really careful when you're working with this stuff to make sure you don't get sick. The final item is, in general, when you're using your laser, you want to make sure you're paying attention to it. Fires can happen. You can have sorts of issues with it. And with acrylic, you noticed on the orange, there were the black marks where it kind of flared up. With it melting the acrylic, there's a good chance of those melting droplets to catch on fire, and you can have a very serious issue very quickly. So just be very, very careful when you're working with this material, making sure you're venting it, make sure you're not leaving it unattended, and also don't look at your laser without having the protective eyeglasses on there, because that light can do some serious damage to your vision. With those safety and caveat pieces out of the way, which are all extremely important, we'll go ahead and we'll dive right in and I'll go through the settings. I'm hoping that over here, I'm going to be able to kind of do an overlay with some easier to read text of what my settings are. If not, I'll have them in the description down below. So we'll start with the black acrylic. As I'm going through here, you'll notice that the thickness that I have stored in my library varies between 2.6 and 2.8 millimeters. I ordered a set of multicolored acrylic sheets from Amazon that were all supposed to be 3 millimeter. None of them are 3 millimeter. They all varied between 2.6 up to, I think the highest was 2.87. So it is going to, again, it goes back to the whole checking your material. Just be careful with what you're working on. I don't know how huge of a difference at these speeds and power it's going to make with that like 0.2 millimeter thickness difference, but it's just something to keep in mind. So with the black, to cut on that one, I had to do it at 150 millimeters per minute, 100% power. You'll notice as I go through here, pretty much every single cut is 100% power. It's really just varying the speed and the number of passes. And the black required 2 passes to cut fully through and get a very nice clean cut on it. So if we compare that to the gray, which as I showed before has some issues with the quality of it, it actually took 30 millimeters per minute and 5 passes. So we're going from 150 millimeters per minute and 2 passes all the way down to 30 millimeters per minute and 5 passes. So you can see how huge of an impact that's going to make to any sort of workload you're doing if you're trying to do anything of a large size or volume or anything like that. So that's where that the lightness of the material and where the color falls on the color spectrum is going to have a huge impact on you. Keeping going down, we'll go into the dark green opaque. This one required 90 millimeters per minute and 3 passes. And again, we can do an easy comparison between that and that lime or light green, which again was at 30 millimeters per minute and 4 passes. You're going to notice a theme here is the really dark materials are the ones that are further away from blue. We're able to run at around between 90 to 150 millimeters per minute, and they on average took around 2 to 3 passes. Then when you get to the lighter colors, or white, it was going to be down to either 30 or 50 millimeters per minute, so much slower, and then 4 or 5 passes to be able to get the exact same result for the same designs going through there. So huge impact on your workload. Going to orange was 90 and 3 passes. We'll go to red first, then I'll come back up to pink. So the red is my 90 millimeters per minute and 2 passes. This is what I kind of use for the baseline. It's fast enough that I don't feel like it's just dragging on. I can create quite a few items very quickly and not have to worry about it. But it's not so fast as a black. But I use this kind of as my baseline for the other colors as we're going through there. I know I said I'd do pink next, but I'm actually going to go from red opaque to the red glitter translucent, or partially transparent first. That is still at the same 90 millimeters per minute speed, but twice as many passes. So it went from 90 millimeters per minute 2 passes to 90 millimeters per minute 4 passes. Those extra passes come into play. That's why it has the additional melting and kind of the bowing and flexing of that material, because of how many times the laser has to go through there, so how long it's actually on the material. Okay, now we'll really go to pink. 30 millimeters per minute, 4 passes. So we're at 1/3 of the power, of the speed that we could do for red, and twice as many passes. So not only are we having to go much, much slower, but we're having to do it many more times to get the exact same result. And that kind of, again, goes back into why you have to be very careful on which color you're picking. Purple, which wasn't bad. I liked purple. It went well. Was a 90 millimeters per minute and 4 passes. So it was the same speed as red, just 2 extra passes. And that comes into, because of course purple is the blending of blue and red, it's closer on the spectrum to blue, which is going to cause it to have more troubles cutting through there. And then the last one we'll go into is the white opaque. So that's going to be the 30 millimeters per minute and 5 passes. So just kind of give you an example of what I was talking about there. Like say we just wanted to do a simple circle, put it on here. So if we set that to be the black, that's going to take 5 minutes to cut that out, and that's a 120 millimeters, so it's a fairly big circle. So 5 minutes. So if we go over here now and we go to the white for that exact same piece now, we've gone from 5 minutes up to 1 hour and 3 minutes. So you can see here that color plays a huge impact on how quick you're going through there. And again, just to kind of give you an idea, if we go back to my baseline of the red, it's going to be 8 minutes and 27 seconds. So as long as you're sticking around those 2 passes in that 90 to 150 or so, it's going to be relatively close in how quickly you get things done. It's nothing to the point where you're going to be stressing about it. But when you get up there to those 50 millimeters per minute, 30 millimeters per minute, 4, 5, 6 passes, it's not really reasonable to be able to stay in the room that long while it's going through there. Unless this is your full-time job. But if it's your full-time job, I'd assume you'd have a better laser than this one. But it's just keep in mind the color is going to come into play, the opacity is going to come into play, the thickness is all going to come into play, and it's all going to be required for you to kind of work through those material testers as you're going through everything. One last thing I do want to show for the settings before I go into kind of an example of making those hanging text earrings is that etching. So if we go to the black opaque, for etching on that one, it was a 2,000 millimeters per minute at 40% power. That same etching on gray was 500 millimeters per minute at 80% power. So we dropped from 2000 down to 500 to get the exact same result. Now I will admit the etching on the gray looked nicer than on the black, so I need to probably tweak those settings on the black to get it to go a little bit deeper. But the problem you're going to find with acrylic, you're going to have a balancing act there of getting it to go slowly or at the right speed and power so that it does etch and you get that nice white look. But if you go too slow or too much power, it's going to burn it, it's going to char, and you're going to get a black look. Now, if you're going to be painting it or anything like that, that shouldn't matter. You can kind of cover that up and make it look nice still. But if you're just going for that pure etching effect, you've got to find that right Goldilocks zone where it's not too slow, not too much power, but not too fast and not too little power. So it's all things you'll figure out as you're kind of going through there, but I will share my settings. And then the last one I kind of really have that on there is for the red opaque. So that is 1000 millimeters per minute at 45% power. So the black was 2040, light gray was 580, and then red is 1045. And they all kind of gave a similar effect on the end. It all depends on that contrast with it. I still need to tweak these in there, but I do want to kind of give you some starting points as you're working on a colored acrylic and cutting it on your diode laser. With all those settings out of the way, we'll go ahead and jump into a simple workflow for creating kind of like stacked text earrings. I'm going to show you two different ways you can kind of go about doing this, and it's all going to come down to how precise you want to be, and a lot will depend on the font you're going to be using. So for this one, I'm going to choose the Bookman old style font, bold, welded. By default, your vertical spacing here will be 0, so I'll set it back to that. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do, so you can see there, we've got the letters. They're vertically aligned, of course. They're perfectly in line with where they need to be, but they're not touching. So that's where this vertical space comes into play. So we'll go ahead and shrink this down until the letters are kind of touching. Okay, and there we go. We have the overlap there, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little better. So what you want is you want to make sure that you're getting overlap, not so much that you're going to lose the quality or the context of the letters, but enough so that when it cuts it out, you're not going to have some really flimsy spaces on there that will break off very easily. And then we'll go and make sure that's welded, and we'll go over here. And now you can see when I clicked off that text, that welded toggle causes it to bring the letters together. It's kind of like doing the weld option over here from your standard Lightburn. So again, if I'm in here and I have welded off, you just have the overlap, welded together, blend brings them together. Now, this is a very quick one. Again, it depends on the font. I don't really like this method for most of the ones I do, and the main reason you can see here is with these two L's stacked together. When you're doing them in this structure and everything like that, you can't play around very well with the horizontal spacement of everything. So they're going to be perfectly aligned, which is great, but your letters are going to blend together and you're going to lose some of the quality or impact you may want with it. So if we compare that to a separate, well, we can do that is I'll zoom out a little bit here, and I'll do each letter individually. And we'll go and select all of these. Oop. All of them, come on, all of them. And we'll go ahead and align their middles. Oh, I missed one. Align their middles. And now what we can do is we can kind of position them manually ourselves. So we'll take the O first, start nudging that up. We'll get it to about the same part. So that's about right there. We'll take the L and we'll bring it up into the O. Again, about like that. And then what we can do is we can take this L and we can offset it a little bit. So generally when you're going to want to, when you're doing something like this, you're going to want to offset multiple letters. That way it kind of keeps it balanced. So we'll offset this O a bit as well. And then we'll take that O and this L, and we will align their rights. Take the R and this L, and we'll align their lefts. And yeah, so that gives me that, and we'll come here and we'll weld these shapes together. And now you can see the end result is fairly similar. I mean, we have almost the exact same thing, except now by offsetting everything, the L's don't blend together that from a distance can look like an E, and you have a little bit more control over the exact placement of everything. So those are two different ways you can go about doing it. Again, it's just doing a new line for each letter and then tweaking your vertical space, or doing each letter separately and then manually doing a weld to bring them together. If you are going to be doing these as earrings for my laser, again, the Atomstack A5 M50 Pro, what I've determined is I want to resize these first. So let's go ahead and make it 36 millimeters. Do them both 36 millimeters. And then what I'll do is I will come here first and we'll add a circle. I like to make it 4 millimeters. And we'll bring that down here and we'll bring that to the R. And that'll be kind of the outline for the hoop. And then we will take that, we'll copy it, Control C, Alt V to paste in place. And we'll change that down to 1.5 millimeters, which is what I've determined I need for that size of that hole. And then we'll take this outer circle and the text, and we will again weld them together. I'm coming over here and I'm clicking it just as you're working through it. If you have those selected like that, you can also just hit Control W, and that will also weld without having to move your mouse. It saves you sometimes you're going through it. And then we'll take all of this and we will group it together. And at that point, you have a nice little earring you can do with hanging text. So again, that was a 4 millimeter outer ring, a 1.5 millimeter inner ring, and then you should be good to go depending on the settings of your laser. It is important that you resize your earring material or your earring design first before you add the circles. Obviously, if you add the circles before you resize it, then when you shrink down the height or width of your earring design, it's going to shrink those circles. So you're no longer going to have the 4 millimeter and 1.5 millimeter. So just make sure you get everything designed and structured and sized properly, and then add your little hoop for it. And that's everything there is to it. It's really, I started at the end this time to show you the finished product, because it is just a very slow, arduous process, and there's not really anything special to do on the laser. I'm not going to show a cutting. I think everyone just skips over those anyway. But there you have it. Hopefully this was useful for some folks, and let me know if this is helpful for you. If something didn't work out for you, if you have a suggestion for how I could do something better, I would absolutely love to kind of hear ways I can kind of improve what I'm doing here as I'm growing and trying to learn new things on this laser. So happy lasering, everyone.